Right, getting ready to start this presentation, the energetics and understanding of poison. The poison path, dark herbalism, occult poisons, and magical practice. Again, if anybody watching the recording has any questions, feel free to send me an email at thepoisonersapothecary@gmail.com. This one is a little bit of a passion project of mine. Um, a lot of it has to do with the topic of my next book, The Poison Path Grimoire, Dark Herbalism, Poison Magic, and Baneful Allies. So it focuses a little bit more on the occult side of the poison path and working with these baneful herbs in magical practice, spirituality, and healing. It investigates some of the more abstract and esoteric implications when it comes to working with poisonous plants. So, the very first thing that kind of attracted me to the poison path and working with baneful herbs um, was the fact that they were poisonous, as well as their connection to witchcraft. So it was just something that really interested me and attracted me, that there was this really deep and long held connection between knowledge of poisonous plants as and the practice of witchcraft or sorcery or magic. So it wasn't until a little bit later that I started to become aware of their medicinal value, and their entheogenic effects. And so it was initially kind of this taboo, forbidden knowledge of these dangerous and potentially deadly plants and their intimate connection to magical practice and the figure of the witch and its mythology that really kind of drew me in. Practitioners of the poison path seek out those plants that have been ostracized or forgotten by most people. The poison path is the way of the occultist and the witch. And while there are powerful physical forces at play, including a plant's toxic and visionary effects, the focus for the poison path is on the esoteric applications for these potent forces. In short, it is the study and application of poisonous, baneful, invasive, and demonized plants for their occult virtues and to connect with them as familiar spirits. This is to develop a deeper understanding of the toxicon, venenum, and pharmacon and its transmutational power. It is a kind of plant alchemy that demonstrates that these master plant spirits work on many levels, at once in a synergy that allows for their spiritual and magical effects. So, poison is something that simultaneously attracts and repels us. Going to read an excerpt from my book, The Poison Path Grimoire, that comes out in November. Poison can mean so many things. In the words of the ancient Roman philosopher Lucretius, what is food to one is bitter poison to another. Powerful poisons known as toxins are found throughout the natural world. When a venomous creature releases toxins, it does so for defense and survival. For humans, poison can be many different things. It is found in medicine, magic, religion, legal discourse, folklore, and even mainstream popular culture. As a metaphor, it can represent everything from the spreading of an idea to complex human experiences, from love to poetic inspiration. Humans are very much an active component in what poison is and what it is capable of. The poison path is inherently individualistic. It is not a fixed way of working or a specific tradition of witchcraft, but the parallels between the two in both language and occult practice are undeniable. Throughout history, while the words change, these themes are spoken about almost synonymously and have been for the better part of 2,000 years. In this book, we will begin to explore in depth the intricate connections between the spirit of the witch and the essence of poison, and how one can tap into these sources for occult exploration and personal empowerment. Poison can be harmful, it can be deadly, it can be intoxicating, both mind altering and aphrodisiac. Poison can be infectious. It is something that has its own unique energetic influence, something that marks certain plants in the botanical world as other. It is in this otherness that we really see their potential as magical allies. This is where we come to the idea of dark herbalism. Dark herbalism focuses on plants that are sinister, malefic, potentially harmful in various different ways, or are othered for some other reason. This could be because they are a threat to commercial agriculture or are deemed to not have any kind of financial value as far as um, mass production and selling and being able to make money off of them. So they are the wild and untamed members of the plant kingdom. When we're going on an important journey to a place we've never been before, to a place that is unfamiliar or scary, it helps to have a guide. Someone who has made this journey before. The same can be said for our spiritual journeys and journeys of healing and transformation. While we can turn to many healing and tonic herbs for light, comfort, and support during times of darkness, we also can find tremendous power and enlightenment when we enlist the help of baneful herbs. I use the term dark herbalism in recognition of the inherent difference in plants that have these qualities. The manner in which they derive or manifest their dark properties tells us a lot about their occult properties. Are they poisonous or invasive, physically dangerous, connected to the dead, carnivorous plants, thorns and brambles, night blooming flowers? These too also occupy a space in the dark pharmacopoeia. Dark herbalism appreciates and respects the sinister and trepidatious qualities of plants and their ability to heal in different ways. It explores the unexplored parts of nature and works with these forces not typically sought out willingly. It is not all about being spooky. It seeks to decipher what attracts us to or repels us from certain things and the emotions and energies they awaken within us. Baneful herbs have special qualities that set them apart from those considered benign or beneficial. They are just as healing as their innocuous counterparts, but their healing is of a different sort. Think of them as wounded healers. They have been into battle, they have seen and done things. Some have been used historically for murder, malice, and all sorts of manipulation. These plants have been marked by the ways in which humans have used or abused them. By connecting with them as allies, we can transform that human darkness or maleficia that surrounds them, just as they can help us transform the darkness within ourselves. Plants are not good or evil, but like all forces of nature, they are powerful. Sometimes that power makes them threatening to humans. Dark herbalism seeks to harness that power, seeking out the plants that have been deemed taboo, dangerous, toxic, pernicious, noxious, invasive, and or sepulchral. Nature is not black or white, it is green. A plant's characteristics and virtues are all filtered through the lens of our own perception. Plant life begins in darkness as a seed, and it is from the darkness of the soil that the plant continues to draw nourishment. Most plants also filter sunlight to create energy, and they are all influenced by the seasons. In other words, plants and humans get what they need to thrive from both the fertile darkness and the vitalizing light. Dark herbalism considers light and dark as an analogy for the dual facets of the being's energy or spirit, understanding that there are many steps in between and their nature is not fixed. Darkness is not simply the absence of light, it is the medium in which light exists. Without darkness, light has nothing to illuminate. Before illumination, the darkness holds all potential and is our original state of existence. The poison path is a term that was coined by author and ethnobotanist Dale Pendle. It is a passion for poisonous plants, animals, and fungi. It is a practice of medicine, magic, plant spirit communication, and spiritual healing. All of us have a different call to what draws us to this work. There's a personal exploration of literal and conceptual poisons in concept and practice, and this is occult toxicology. The poison path is not limited to one culture or tradition, and its wisdom is not contained by one stream of gnosis. Dale Pendle specifically mentions the nightshade family and the tropane alkaloids in their connection to European paganism in the quote from Cabinet magazine that says, "I am in touch with some people who favor the tropanes. Mostly pagans seem to like them. Hopefully they can spare me some of the field work." This is in reference to the main players in the nightshade family that we typically associate with European witchcraft. Deadly nightshade, henbane, mandrake, and datura, the plants of the medieval witch's flying ointment. In and of itself, a container for witchcraft, mythos, and plant spirit gnosis. We go back to earliest antiquity, where we start to begin our understanding of what poison is and what it has meant to people throughout the course of history. The word pharmacon refers to a beneficial drug and simultaneously a harmful substance. These were compounds that were known to be both medicinal and magical, as well as potentially dangerous. It is the root of the modern word pharmacy, which comes from the Greek pharmakeia. To be a polypharmakos was to be knowledgeable of these potentially deadly and potent plants. Hecate, Circe, Medea were all polypharmakos. The word pharmakon also shares a common root with pharmakoi, which was the idea of a scapegoat. These sacrificial victims were used in the ancient world to mitigate plague, disaster, and misfortune. Connected to the idea of the scapegoat, which has its own associations to witchcraft through the Sabbatic goat. Pharmakon was associated with magic. While the mechanism of their action was not fully understood, their potency and their ability to alter consciousness and affect the individual in a dramatic way was widely known and associated with its magical influence. While these substances had a chemical basis for their means of action, they were also seen as powerful magical forces in and of themselves that contained their own spirits. These substances were seen as transformative. They could have dramatic effects depending on their application. They could lull one into a deep sleep. They could relieve pain. They could create ecstasy and arousal. They could provide connection to the spirit world and the divine through trance and altered states of consciousness. Many of the figures connected to the pharmakon are also connected to the early archetypes of the figure of the witch. Toxicon, which as we can see is the root of our word toxic, slightly different from pharmakon, which had a medicinal value. The toxicon was something that was deadly. It was used in ancient warfare. It is associated with poison arrows, which we see in the commonly shared root of toxon for the word bow. This is also used in the Latin name of the yew tree, taxus, or its association to bow making, as the toxic wood of the yew was once used to make ancient bows and arrows. The toxicon was a form of ancient biological warfare, and it had its own societal taboos. While it was something that could turn the tides of war, and in many cases acted through psychological warfare, the toxicon was something that was seen as sometimes a less than honorable form of battle, a war crime, I guess. So it would have been associated with subterfuge and sometimes seen as cowardly. So this would be regarding, poisoning the enemy's food, poisoning wine, and creating some kind of a gift that was meant to lull them into a false sense of security. But then, of course, when they received the food, the gift, the sacrifice, that they would then ingest it unknowingly and it would create an unfair advantage. So there's some association to poisoning not being necessarily the most honorable way to engage in warfare. The Scythians in particular were known for their use of poison in battle and were widely feared throughout the ancient world. They developed a noxious poison formula that they used to envenom the tips of their arrows that was called Scythicon. The Scythians were also associated with witchcraft. Also see a photo of wolfsbane, aconitum, or aconite, which also shares a root with toxicon. This was used to poison spears and arrows for the killing of wolves, other predatory animals, as well as humans. The earliest mythological association between poison arrows, or kind of their origin story, comes from Hercules and the Hydra. The Hydra was a mythological creature said to be immortal. It had multiple different heads, serpentine heads, as you can see in the background. And every time one of those heads was cut off, two more would grow back in its place. It was also believed to have one head that was completely immortal. Hercules found a way to slay this creature, and it was from the venom that was dripping from one of its severed heads that he dipped his arrows in, creating the first poison arrows. Poison is one of the sort of elemental or basic forces of nature. It is connected to the energies of dissolution, entropy, chaos, those primal generative forces that existed before creation and before the order of the universe as we know it took its form and allowed for physical beings to manifest. It is associated with dangerous and primal creatures, as we see in Norse mythology, with the idea of Eiter or venom. This was one of the 7 mystical substances created when fire and ice joined in the Norse creation myth. We also see the concept of venom in creation myths from other parts of the world as well. In Norse mythology, venom represents dissolution, chaos, the forces of the Jotun, or giant race. While this is seen as a destructive force, it is necessary for ongoing creation, just like we see in the cycle of life and death. It is a necessary component of life being possible. So without that sort of death and decay and destruction, creation and life and existence would essentially cease to exist. So in order for things to be created and to continue and to move forward, other things need to be broken down, destroyed, just like we see in the growing cycle, that we need the soil and all of the dead plant and animal material that fertilizes it, to provide the foundation for the next stage, the new things to grow and to come and take their place, and so on and so on. Venom played an important role in Anglo-Saxon medical texts as the source of disease and suffering. So it was believed to be this sort of harmful influence that created the source of disease. It's very similar to the idea of miasma in ancient Greece. So this would have been before people really understood what bacteria and viruses were. It was considered miasma or venom or sort of this harmful influence that was able to be transferred from one person to another. That was the source of all disease. So in this case, it is considered a neutral substance. While it is associated with death and destruction and dissolution, there is no morality behind that. Uh, it is just sort of one of the sustaining and supporting forces of the universe and the cycle of creation and destruction, death, and rebirth. In Norse mythology, it is associated with the dragon or worm, Nidhogg, that resides in the roots of the world tree. So again, this is a representative of a destructive force, that this dragon that lives at the base of the world tree is constantly gnawing away at it. While the Norns, the three fates in Norse mythology, are constantly reapplying a healing clay to the roots of the world tree to kind of balance that out. So the witch, beginning as the pharmacus, has been the vessel for poison knowledge, poison gnosis since antiquity. A witch was seen as both a spiritual contagion and a physical person. It's an early association with nocturnal spirits of death and disease, connected to the idea of flying venoms and miasma and these demonic entities that were these nocturnal spirits that would result in death and disease from various different causes that eventually fed into the idea of the witch archetype as being this harmful force of nature. Poison is also connected to the transmission of knowledge through the serpent on the tree in the Garden of Eden. It's connected to the fall of the angelic race that would go on to populate the world and essentially create this race of magical individuals. Poison in various forms was also closely associated with the witch and used in magical context. Similar to witchcraft, the knowledge and use of toxins from the most ancient of times has been prescribed by law and religious decree. Like the witch, whose presence in communities was regarded as insidious and polluting, the presence of poison is often undetectable, lurking unseen until it has exacted a toll in victims. This shared continence of the grotesque inspires fear and awe, and has animated the violent aversion to both the witch and poison over time. Beneficium concerns poisons as a theoretical and practical component of the witchcraft of history, as well as their echoes in modern occult practices, particularly those known as the sabbatic current. That's a quote from Beneficium, Magic, Witchcraft, and the Poison Path. Like to talk about modern witchcraft and its development, um, even though we're talking about poison for the sake of it being poisonous and not necessarily its entheogenic effects. This is something interesting that I like to point out that shows kind of the difference between different major players in the early witchcraft revival. This is from the book Genuine Witchcraft is Explained, talking about the secret history of the Royal Windsor Coven and the Regency, run by the late Robert Cochrane. The Cochrane tradition went on to be the clan of Tubal-Cain, and it went on to influence subsequent sabbatic and traditional witchcraft practices. Cochrane was known for being fascinated by the nightshade alkaloids, particularly Atropa belladonna, which may have played a role in his death. And this is a excerpt from a letter that was written by Cochrane to some of his other coven members. And I'll go ahead and read that because it was typed on a typewriter and it's a little bit hard to read. The castles, seven worlds, kingdoms, etc., are descriptions of unworlds that are keys to power. By careful symbolic description, it is possible for a human to explore them and make contact with the inhabitants under the influence of certain drugs. These drugs are to be found in butanine, toad venom, fly agaric, spotted toadstool, henbane, the smoke thereof, and there are many other plants, all of which have a property. I am fully aware that Chalky and George are conversant with these plants and their properties, therefore I lay the preparation and research into these plants in their capable hands. The reason for going round the ring is strongly associated with the use of these plants and their quick dispersal throughout the body. I recommend that myself should be the first to try any new drug, and I would like to emphasize that these drugs are not habit-forming, although all of them are highly poisonous. On no account is anyone to attempt their use without the presence of the group. So this is referring to the use of different poisonous plants and fungi, plants in the nightshade family, and fly agaric mushrooms as their use as entheogens for entering altered states to access these different worlds. This is something that really distinguishes traditional witchcraft practices with the lowercase t from other British traditional witchcraft practices that would go on to influence modern Wicca, specifically the work of Gerald Gardner, who really tried to distance and distinguish himself from anything that would have connected the new religion from the drug culture that was happening in the 60s and 70s. Robert Cochrane was on the other side of this, obviously, and was interested in working with these plants. So had he lived past the age of 36, it would have been interesting to see how witchcraft would have maybe developed a little bit differently. And there would have been more of an interest in working with these plants in a spiritual capacity, and not so much of a gap that we see in the early modern witchcraft revival, where they're really not talked about very frequently at all in the context of modern witchcraft. We see different ethnobotanical authors writing about them, but it doesn't really start to pop back up in mention in a witchcraft context until a lot later. So as I mentioned in the beginning, poison has its own energy and its own influence. It can be something that is dangerous and deadly, something that is healing, something that is intoxicating, aphrodisiac, influential in a variety of different ways. So there is this idea of working with this energy and cultivating this energy for power, influence, wealth, love, and protection. So this is seen in ideas surrounding miasma, contagion, intoxication, in that these poisonous substances, these poisonous formulas, um, were believed to exude their own sort of magical influence, so their own kind of spirit and their own energy. We see a really good example of this in Chinese magic in the cult of goo. Goo refers to a spiritual toxin that is created by combining a number of venomous creatures into a vessel. It would be things like scorpions, snakes, venomous toads, spiders, other insects. And they would allow all of these creatures to kind of fight each other, and essentially create this spiritual toxin. So it was through the use of these creatures that were seen as toxic or malefic in some way, whether they were physically poisonous or just represented sort of the idea of poison, that they would go on to create this spiritual toxin, that people would wield for various different purposes. We can see on the right-hand side the two different glyphs for goo. The one on the top left, you can almost tell that it is a cup with two worms or snakes coming out of it. So this is symbolic of that poison chalice that contains the goo poison. And we see on the bottom right-hand side, the other glyph, it is supposed to represent three insects, and then you can kind of see the shape of the vessel at the bottom. So it was this idea of cultivating this poison and having this vessel or this container that essentially became a spirit vessel, whose malefic spirit could then be sent out. And this is kind of an Eastern cognate to witchcraft accusations, that people in southern China would have been accused of cultivating this goo poison, stealing the wealth of other people, um, using it for love magic to manipulate people, and in different ways, kind of acquiring more power and social status, essentially through sending out this spirit, this demonic spirit that was associated with poison. So the poison path and plant medicine. So we talk a lot about the entheogenic effects of many of these plants, their consciousness altering effects, and their connection to different taboos and transgressions and kind of these diabolical associations that are connected to them, as being evil or harmful, by people that don't necessarily understand their importance, their cultural importance. So I give an example here, speaking about Amazonian plant medicine, specifically guayusa and ayahuasca. This is a quote from a Jesuit, Spanish Jesuit traveler that was commenting on the Hibaro or Shuar, in their use of the ayahuasca brew. Same day, it mixed together all of these diabolical herbs with guayusa and tobacco, which was also invented by the devil, and allow this to boil until only a little liquid remains, the quintessence of evil. And the faith of those who drink it has been twisted by the devil through the fruit of enchantment. The Hivaroan people were also the only indigenous people known to have revolted against the Spanish Empire successfully and deny all of the attempts by the Spaniards to conquer them. Um, and of course, still exists today. It still hold ayahuasca ceremonies in parts of Ecuador and Peru. So it's this sort of lack of understanding that people would create all of these sort of negative associations when it came to psychoactive plants or plant medicine or poisonous plants. And it's kind of where this idea of poison being something um, evil and negative and malefic sort of comes from. But then when we take a closer look, then we realize that they do have all of these, medicinal properties, and it's all about, the knowledge of being able to use them and using them in the right context. So poison kind of becoming this blanket term for something that was evil and diabolical and just sort of been avoided altogether, that caused us to sort of lose a lot of our individual plant knowledge. And that is part of the work of, the poison path and occult toxicology, is really investigating these plants on an individual basis and coming to understand how to work with them, what their medicinal value is, what their spiritual value is, um, through approaching them out of respect, to connect with their spirits and their medicine. So I talk about alchemy a little bit here. This has more to do with the transmutation of poison, toxic energies, toxic influences, toxic behaviors, different parts of ourselves and influences in our lives that we want to change. So essentially using that idea of to separate and draw out from spagyric alchemy, to recognize these spiritual or energetic toxins and neutralize them or transmute them and turn them into something beneficial. So it's about how to draw out the medicine, the physical and spiritual, as well as how to draw out the poisons in ourselves and our own lives. These can be abstract concepts, energetic influences, occult forces, and spiritual poisons. So yes, poison is medicine and poison is in the dose, but it goes much deeper than that. So using them as supportive allies for shadow work, personal healing, personal transformation, even working with them on a microdose or energetic or vibrational level, in a way to kind of fight poison with poison and gain healing and insight through transmuting these different things in our lives into something that we can benefit from. So poison has been used as a metaphor for a lot of different things by a lot of different people. We use it to describe ideas that are harmful. We use it to describe toxic people, toxic behaviors, intoxication, even in some cases, love or infatuation or obsession can be metaphorically connected to poison, in that it's something that infects you and starts to take away your logic or your ability to make decisions or different things like that. We hear about like toxic relationships. So poison is very much a metaphor used to describe a whole lot of different things. So I've included some different examples here that talk about poison, specifically spiritual toxins, metaphorically from some different sources. This first one is for the poisoning of spirit. It comes from Islam. It refers to arrogance, pride, ambition for wealth, carnality, selfishness, etc. The quote says that such a person is like the dead in terms of liveliness of the heart and spirit, experiencing a blindness of insight. They see poison as an antidote, and like one attempting to quench their thirst with seawater, they burn further as they drink and continue to burn, or to continue to drink as they burn. They have hearts with which they do not seek the essence of matters to grasp the truth, and they have eyes with which they do not see, and ears with which they do not hear. They are like cattle, rather even more astray. The next article on spiritual poison comes from a Baptist minister. Um, God has blessed us with many helpful technologies, such as smartphones, tablets, computers, social media, and the internet. However, these same tools, when used improperly, quickly become a curse that slowly poisons every aspect of our lives. So this is talking about the negative impact of technology, and then goes on to mention pornography, prostitution, sexual immorality, fornication, fantasizing, masturbation, all sexual activity outside the confines of a monogamous heterosexual marriage. So poison is typically used as this metaphor to describe things that are harmful to society or to a specific group of people or some kind of outside influence that is detrimental. This next example talks about spiritual medicine, begins as poison. It's from a Buddhist source. This was a treatment of bird phobia. So there was this patient that was being treated for a phobia that they had. They were intensely afraid of birds. And the therapist would show them like a stuffed bird, like a real bird, but it wasn't alive, show it to them and kind of gauge like their level of discomfort and like increasingly um, bring this bird closer and closer to them to kind of like intensify their level of fear. The thing that differed in this therapy session for the patient versus other therapy sessions is that the other therapists would give them an escape route. So they would say, like, I'm going to show you this fake bird. You tell me, like, how it makes you feel, what your level of discomfort is. But they would always add, if it becomes too intense and too much for you, then like there's the door, you can leave, or just say the word and we'll stop or whatever. So they were always given this escape route. The difference with this was that there was the stoppered vessel. The poisonous spirit in this case is the fear, which first had to be produced before being transformed. So this idea of the stoppered vessel, it kind of reminds me of like an alchemical crucible or vessel that is, containing the poison. So in this case, they are producing the poison or the fear, which is what they were seeking treatment for, and then transforming that or neutralizing it. So they would make the person experience the fear and then sit with it and then wait for it to eventually dissipate on its own without giving them the option to end the session or to escape. So it was through that kind of being stuck and forced to face their fears that they were able to realize that, like, okay, I'm having this uncomfortable feeling, but it eventually goes away. And then after they sort of break through that threshold, that they're able to get to a place where their anxiety has gone and kind of conquer the fear in that way. So I thought that was kind of interesting, sort of fighting poison with poison or confronting poison in this setting where there's no way out but through. This next one is spiritual poison from the Mormon Church of Latter-day Saints. And they were cautious that no poison should be administered among them. For if their wine would poison a Lamnite, it would also poison a Nephite, and thus they did try their liquors. So this article is talking about being cautious about the different things that people allow into their lives. So kind of using a system of checks and balances to evaluate whether something is beneficial or harmful. Also being careful about the amount of good things that we allow to be administered to us, because things that initially seem like they're good or beneficial can eventually become poisonous or detrimental, because poison is obviously all about the dose. So even things that are beneficial in smaller doses may not be so much in larger doses. Then we have the idea of the three poisons in Buddhism. We see this represented on the left-hand side by the three animals. There's a pig, a snake, and a rooster. So these represent three of the spiritual poisons that kind of lead to disharmony and unhappiness and all of the things that cause a person suffering and essentially take them away from that state of nirvana or oneness with the divine. On the right hand side is a coin. Oops, this is a protective talisman um, from China, and it represents the five poisons. So you can kind of see there's a frog, a snake, a centipede, a spider, and a tiger. While tigers are not poisonous, they kind of represented this sort of harmful, malefic, poisonous theme. So these five creatures were put on the coins and they were carried as protective talismans. The fifth day of the fifth month in Chinese lore was known to be a day that poison was very readily transferable. So it was kind of it was an unlucky day. So there was a lot of talismans and folk practices that would have been employed to sort of protect against and ward off this poisonous influence that was associated with that day. The three poisons in Buddhism. The first one is greed. It represents an inner hunger of striving toward an unattainable goal. It leaves one unsatisfied and is often temporary. So this constant having to accumulate more, sort of a void that's not ever able to be filled. The antidote to greed would be to cultivate selflessness, generosity, detachment, and contentment. The second poison is hatred or aversion. This creates conflict and enemies within ourselves and the world around us. The antidote to that is loving kindness, compassion, patience, and forgiveness. The third poison is delusion, not understanding the nature of reality and what brings about happiness and enlightenment. The antidote for delusion is to cultivate wisdom, insight, and right understanding. So I think the cool thing here is that with the three poisons in Buddhism, not only do they identify the poison, but they also give an antidote. So ways that one can sort of spiritually heal and cultivate these qualities that transmute the poison into something beneficial. It is no coincidence that poison is as ubiquitous in the collective subconscious as it is in the world around us, especially now. Humans have always been simultaneously afraid of and obsessed with death. We see poison pop up in literature, drama, and storytelling since Homer's Odyssey. So it's a very sort of powerful literary tool that can be used to symbolize a lot of different things. From femme fatales to vengeful lovers to protective mothers, poison is often wielded by feminine figures. So we've got Jillian from Practical Magic, who used the belladonna and accidentally poisoned her boyfriend who came back to haunt her. And then we've got Astrid from White Oleander, who used the toxin from the White Oleander plant to poison her partner as well. And these were both very powerful, powerful female figures. So poison is wielded by both the villain and the victim. So it could be used to heal or to harm. So we see the poison apple in Snow White, obviously being used to harm. And then alternately in Pan's Labyrinth, the character here is working with a mandrake root, and she does this to help heal her mother, who's dying. Unfortunately, the mandrake root is discovered and destroyed, which leads to her mother's death. So we can see that poison can be used either to heal or to harm, and it kind of depends on the intention and the person using it. So the intentional harm caused by poisonous flora, fauna, and fungi is our baggage, not the plant, as is the perception of harm and darkness and danger. Poison and poisonous plants seem to be popping up a lot in different movies and TV shows, which I think is really interesting too. Here I've got some different scenes from different shows. Represents a supernatural influence, so something unknown. Poison can also be symbolic of a dangerous love, um, kind of being consumed by that love, being consumed by another person, and in effect, intoxicated. It can be a symbol for protecting something precious, whether that is knowledge or a person. They're seen as sort of gatekeepers and initiators, and they often have to do with fate and facing death, as well as reclaiming personal power. Top left, we have, oh, this was from Vikings Valhalla. She was from, I think, somewhere in the Middle East, and she had all of this knowledge about astrology and poisonous plants and was working with deadly nightshade. So I really love that character. Then we have the Datura flower from the autopsy of Jennifer's body, which was this very like mysterious autopsy case. Or no, the autopsy of Jane Doe. Jennifer's body is a different movie. The autopsy of Jane Doe, where there's all of this supernatural stuff going on. They're trying to figure out like this girl's cause of death and her identity and all of that. And one of the things that kind of leads to the autopsy unfolding is the discovery of this datura flower in her stomach. Bottom left-hand side, this is from the Shadow and Bone series. So they were talking about Datura inoxia, but the flower that they used was hibiscus, which I thought was kind of funny because they don't even look alike. But it was these flowers that were kind of almost like a security measure, I guess, to stop them from going wherever they were trying to go. They're poisonous and they kind of put everybody to sleep. And this character that you see here looking at the butterflies figured out that the butterflies that were feeding on the Datura anoxia that was actually hibiscus, they were immune to the poison, so they acted as the antidote that was able to revive the people so they could continue on with the quest that they were on. The next one to the right of that is from Penny Dreadful. So they're walking through the botanical gardens, and he's trying to, be like seductive and, um, take her on this date. And he's talking about the deadly nightshade flowers and how she's, so like them and this mysterious, seductive, beautiful person, but also, representing like her dark or dangerous side. But that's another example of kind of poison plant misrepresentation in popular culture, because those are not deadly nightshade flowers. They are really giant, bittersweet nightshade flowers. So I think that when they Googled deadly nightshade, they maybe found the wrong image, because if you do put in a Google search for that, the bittersweet nightshade flowers will pop up as well as the actual deadly nightshade flowers. But also they're maybe a little bit more aesthetic, so they just decided to use those instead of the actual deadly nightshade flower. So modern poison magic. I like to include this because whenever I hear the song Her by Megan Thee Stallion, it makes me think of poison magic, essentially, transmuting the evil eye and any kind of energy or influence that is sent out by haters or by people who are jealous or people who want to see you fail, and basically using that energy to create something beneficial and to basically increase your own power and your own success. And that's very much kind of the idea behind the goo poison magic in cultivating this very dangerous, noxious substance that could then be used to acquire all of the things that you want in life. I thought it was interesting too, because in part of the song, as she's saying, all this hate giving me a pretty face. I eat hate, that's why I ain't got to waste. The more hoes hate, the more money I make. Then she says, I come in every room and draw attention like a centerpiece, step in for a long time, moving like a centipede. So centipedes were one of the ingredients that were used in the vessel for creating the goo poison that was used to acquire all of these desirable things and had this, malefic influence and this spiritual power. And prior to that, she mentions drawing attention like a centerpiece. So that makes me think of the old, the credenza tables that they used to use during the Renaissance period when poisoning was all in vogue and everybody was very paranoid about being poisoned. They had these really ornate centerpieces or credence tables is what they called them, and they would have different apparatuses. I should have put a picture on here of them, but they would have like pieces of coral hanging from them or shark's teeth or different things like that that were believed to alert the person or the people in the room that somebody had brought poison into the room. So they were called credence tables because they gave credence to the fact that it was either safe or not safe to consume whatever happened to be in that room. So a lot of different like poison lore, poison path connections in this song. So I always think of that. And then also the transmuting the hatred and the negativity into something that's beneficial, in this case, the amount of money that she's making or her attractiveness or influence or whatever. So I definitely think that it is something in collective subconscious that comes out in some really interesting ways sometimes. So what does this all mean for us and for the plants? The plants want to help. They're good with or without us. This is more about us. Poisonous plants are mirrors for all of the best and worst parts of being human. They allow us to tap into the hidden parts of ourselves and to see where we need the most healing. They also offer a window into our individual and collective shadow. So the different qualities that each poisonous plant has, they tell us different things about ourselves, what attracts us to them. You know, some of us are attracted to or I think all of us that are maybe interested in poisonous plants are attracted to that sort of darkness that they have, or that sinister side, or the fact that they can be potentially deadly, or there's this element of danger. You know, there is something about that that attracts a certain kind of person. And if we look a little bit deeper into the individual qualities of those plants that we feel drawn to, we can start to really learn a lot about our own shadow or our own healing. When we are cast into darkness for being different, it can be difficult to trust the light again. Healing doesn't have to be messy and painful, but sometimes it needs to be. And the poison path is part of that alternate road. So it's important to ask yourself, why are you here? What draws you into wanting to work with poisons and poisonous plants? Everyone has a deeper reason for wanting to work with poisonous plants, unless you're just here because you agree that they're awesome. So what attracts, interests, and fascinates you about them or a particular one? Are you attracted to a specific plant ally? What do you already know about it? What new insights and information can you gain about this plant? And how do you connect with that information? So kind of sitting with the different emotions and feelings that it brings up for you. You know, is it something that attracts you and draws you in and makes you feel powerful or in control or dangerous or monstrous? Or is it something that is very repulsive or brings up a lot of fear, or, you know, looking at the plants that we don't have any connection to or seem to have like some kind of resistance to, looking at those as well and kind of seeing like, you know, maybe there are some messages here or reasons why we're feeling this kind of resistance versus you know, a fascination or attraction. So it kind of works both ways. I've included a poison bottle warding spell. So this could be created for a variety of different purposes. We can work it as a protective vessel to protect against spiritual poisons, the evil eye, unhealthy influences, different things like that. It can be used in shadow work as a sort of vessel or representation of the shadow itself, putting different things in there that symbolize those different shadow aspects, and then being able to separate that from and take that outside of the self for reflection and transmutation. So it can be as a focal point for meditation, shadow work, and conversation with the shadow aspects of the self. And of course, we can use it in the way as the goo poison, cultivating poison to access this otherness, creates a shift in consciousness and energetics that can be tapped into for spell work. So just working with poison in general is a very transgressive and taboo thing. I think we have this subconscious and instinctual knowledge that the components that we're working with are potentially harmful and in the right circumstances, could kill us or could cause us harm in some way. So just by, a willingness to engage with those components, we're kind of taking a step in a transgressive direction in a sense that we're, almost like willingly putting ourselves in harm's way. I mean, we're working with them safely, and harming ourselves is definitely not the goal. But subconsciously, it creates kind of a shift, just like any other transgressive sort of action. And that allows us to connect with this otherness and this sort of strange, inhuman force that is poison. Some of the different components of a poison bottle. Um, so here I've got a few different examples. Not all of them are poisonous, but they all kind of represent that, um, dark, transgressive type of energy. So we've got graveyard dirt, insects and spiders, lizards and snakes. I only use things that I have already found that are dead, so I'm not hurting or killing anything by making this, even though, maybe traditionally and with the example of the goo poison created with the different creatures put in the vessel and allowed to fight each other. That was something that was probably done. The Sithicon that I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, that poison was created by putting a bunch of like snakes and scorpions and things in a vessel and allowing them to fight each other and die and then putrefy. And then they would add other things like human excrement and all kinds of terrible ingredients that they would dip their arrows in. But in this case, just working in a modern context, only using creatures that are already dead. With the exception of the gnats in the little dish you can see on the top right hand side corner. Those are gnats that I trapped from the indoor garden because every spring there's like a gnat apocalypse where we just get like a crazy amount of gnats in here. So I decided to use some of those that I caught from my indoor garden and put those into the poison bottle as well. But the idea is noxious ingredients, things that represent poison in one way or another. So of course, poisonous plants, seeds, roots, berries, and leaves. Also things like thorns. All these aren't necessarily poison. They have that martial energy, that Mars energy. Also kind of the pointy injectability. So think like snake fangs and things like that. Also included Venus flytrap. While this isn't a poisonous plant, it's one that I kind of associate with dark herbalism, just because it is carnivorous. So it has this quality of like grabbing and trapping and drawing things in, which is kind of the idea behind working this poison bottle in a protective capacity. Of course, you can include things like mushrooms. Also got pictured some black nightshade root, castor bean, rosary pea, snake sheds, different things like that. So everything gets added to the bottle and then that would get closed and sealed up. And then I draw 3 X's on the bottle. So these represent sort of 3 crosses or protection essentially, but then also represent a symbolic representation of poison. So this is a sort of a spin on a traditional witch bottle, which people would include different sharp ingredients, glass, razors, different things like that, and then fill it up with their urine, and that would get, hidden under the doorstep or buried in the yard, or put in some place where no one's going to find it, to act as a protective measure, or something that would absorb any kind of magical workings or negative influences that were directed at the person. So it's kind of the same idea behind that. With mine, when I made that, I put it like just on the inside of the doorway, like right at the threshold, kind of behind the front door, to act as a filter, or not a filter, but a deterrent for any kind of unwanted influences or toxic individuals that may try to enter into like my physical space, to send them away, make it uncomfortable for them to stay in the vicinity. So that's one example of the working of poison magic. So that concludes this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email at thepoisonersapothecary@gmail.com. Again, I cover a lot of this in the new book, The Poison Path Grimoire, which really kind of delves into the idea of dark herbalism, and occult toxicology, and working with poison as sort of a magical energy and occult force, that can be directed into a variety of different ritual practices.